The discovery of Homo naledi within the Rising Star Cave system of South Africa has fundamentally reshaped our understanding of the human evolutionary tree, revealing a species that challenges the traditional linear narrative of progress. This ancient relative, characterized by a perplexing mosaic of primitive and modern anatomical features, existed far more recently than its physical appearance initially suggested, living alongside early members of our own species. The extraordinary discovery in the Rising Star Cave. The story began on September 13th, 2013, when two cavers exploring the popular Rising Star Cave system discovered an unexplored narrow crack only 18 centimeters wide. After crawling through this tight passage and descending 12 meters, they entered a small chamber filled with a scatter of bones that resembled human remains. This discovery prompted paleoanthropologist Lee Berger to assemble an expansive team, including 6 female scientists specifically chosen for their ability to navigate the cave's restrictive passages. The excavation yielded an unprecedented treasure trove of fossils. In the Naledi chamber, researchers found 1,550 fossil elements belonging to at least 15 individuals, while the Naledi chamber later revealed another 131 fossils from at least 3 more individuals. These remains were remarkably well preserved, with some skeletons found in articulated states, such as hands and feet still connected. This site represents the most extensive representation of skeletal elements ever discovered at any African hominin site, providing a uniquely comprehensive look at a single prehistoric population. A morphological mystery. Ancient traits in a recent time. When researchers first analyzed the remains, the morphology suggested a deep antiquity. Homo naledi possessed many archaic traits reminiscent of Australopithecines from millions of years ago, which led scientists to initially believe the fossils were between 1 and 2 million years old. However, dating methods conducted in 2017, including electron spin resonance and uranium-thorium dating, revealed a much younger age, between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. This chronological placement was shocking, as it meant Homo naledi lived during the Middle Pleistocene, a time when much larger-brained ancestors of modern humans were already roaming Africa. The anatomy of Homo naledi is a study in contradictions. Standing approximately 143 centimeters, 4 feet 9 inches, tall and weighing about 37.4 kilograms, 88 pounds, they were small-bodied compared to other Middle Pleistocene hominins. Their sexual dimorphism, where males are roughly 20% larger than females, is similar to that of Homo erectus and modern humans, which is unexpected given their otherwise primitive features. The brain and skull. Small but sophisticated. One of the most striking features of Homo naledi is its small brain size. With a cranial capacity between 460 and 610 cubic centimeters, their brains were comparable to those of Australopithecines and significantly smaller than those of Homo habilis or Homo erectus. However, brain size does not tell the full story of intelligence. 3-dimensional endocasts show that Homo naledi had a frontal lobe organization similar to later members of the genus Homo. This region is associated with complex behaviors such as tool use, language, and social structures, suggesting that Homo naledi may have been more cognitively advanced than their small brain size would imply. Their dentition further complicates their classification. While they had small brains, their teeth and mandibles were also relatively small, a combination rarely seen in the fossil record where small brains usually correlate with large, robust jaws. Their teeth show wear patterns, suggesting a diet of hard, gritty foods like nuts, unwashed roots, and tubers, indicating they occupied a unique ecological niche in the South African high veld. A body built for 2 worlds. The postcranial skeleton of Homo naledi reveals a species adapted for both terrestrial travel and arboreal activity. Their shoulders and rib cage were primitive, with shoulder blades situated high on the back, much like Australopithecines, suggesting they were proficient climbers. Their fingers were proportionally longer than almost any other fossil hominin and were prominently curved, further supporting the idea that climbing was a significant part of their lifestyle. Conversely, their lower bodies were strikingly human-like. Homo naledi was undoubtedly a biped. Their feet were modern in appearance, efficient for running and long-distance walking. This mosaic anatomy suggests they spent the majority of their time on the ground, but likely used trees to escape predators or access specific food resources. Their hands also featured highly developed thumbs with muscle attachments for precision gripping, meaning they were anatomically capable of manufacturing and using stone tools, even though no specific tools have yet been found in direct association with them. The enigma of burial and behavioral complexity. The most controversial aspect of Homo naledi is how their remains ended up deep within the Rising Star Cave. Reaching the Naledi chamber is a grueling 40-minute journey for modern cavers with high-tech equipment. Researchers have proposed that the bodies were deliberately deposited there by other members of their species. The lack of predator damage, the absence of other animal remains, except for a few rodents, and the fact that the bodies were deposited over a long period suggest this was not a one-time natural disaster. If Homo naledi did bury their dead, it would imply an incredible level of behavioral complexity, including the controlled use of fire to navigate the pitch-black cave passages. Some critics argue that natural forces like flooding or mummification could explain the site, or that a different entrance may have once existed, but primary researchers maintain there is no evidence of water flow or alternative shafts. The possibility that such a small-brained hominin practiced funerary rituals challenges our assumptions about the relationship between brain size and human behaviors, like grieving. Place in evolution and extinction. The exact position of Homo naledi on the evolutionary tree remains enigmatic. Some studies suggest they are a South African variety of Homo habilis, while others argue they are a distinct species that branched off very early from the lineage that led to Homo erectus. What is clear is that they survived much longer than anyone expected, coexisting with early modern humans for thousands of years. Their extinction was likely not the result of direct conflict with Homo sapiens. Instead, environmental shifts toward more open grasslands may have reduced the mosaic forest grassland habitats that Homo naledi preferred. Additionally, their low genetic diversity suggests they may have been a small, vulnerable population. The story of Homo naledi is a powerful reminder that human evolution is not a straight line. It was a complex, bushy tree with many lineages living at the same time, some of which retained ancient forms while developing sophisticated behaviors. As we continue to study these long-lost hominins, we are forced to reconsider what it truly means to be part of the genus Homo. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, close your eyes. Let the heavy curtain of the present day fall away. Take a deep, slow breath, inhaling the dry, sun-baked scent of the wild olive trees and the sharp, coppery tang of red dust. We are no longer where you were a moment ago. We are drifting under the vast, indomitable sky of the cradle of humankind in South Africa. It is a place where the earth remembers everything, even if we have forgotten. The year is 2013, a mere blink in the timeline of the valley, and the date is September 13th. The sun is high and fierce, bleaching the color from the grass, but we are moving away from the light. We are following two men, Rick Hunter and Stephen Tucker. They are not famous academics in tweed jackets. They are recreational cavers, men with lean frames and a peculiar sort of courage that allows them to find comfort in spaces where others would find only terror. They are the sort of people who look at a hole in the ground no wider than a dinner plate and think, "I wonder what's on the other side." A delightfully specific type of madness that drives all great discoveries. We drift alongside them as they descend into the Rising Star Cave system. The air changes instantly as we cross the threshold. The heat of the high veld vanishes, replaced by a cool, damp stillness that smells of ancient water and wet limestone. The silence here is heavy, a physical weight pressing against the eardrums, broken only by the scuff of boots and the rhythmic, labored breathing of the men. They are moving through the map we know, through the well-trodden corridors of a cave system that has been explored for decades. Historians and geologists alike believed Rising Star had given up all its secrets. They thought every chamber had been measured, every stalactite named. But caves are tricksters. They hide their hearts behind curtains of rock. Rick and Steven are deep inside now, venturing off the known map, their headlamps cutting violently through the absolute dark, catching dust motes that dance like microscopic stars. They reach a section known as the Dragon's Back, a jagged ridge of rock that requires a precarious climb. It is dangerous work, the kind that demands total focus, where a slip means a tumble into the jagged dark. But at the top of this climb, they find something the maps missed, a fissure, a crack in the floor. It is absurdly small. Measured later, it is only about 18 centimeters, 7 inches, wide. It looks less like a doorway and more like a mistake in the rock. To you or me, it is an impassable barrier, a place where the mountain says, stop. To Rick and Steven, it is a whisper. It is an invitation. The wind doesn't blow here, but there is a pull, a gravity of the unknown. They peer down into the blackness of the fissure. It drops vertically, a stone throat swallowing the light. There is no reason to go down there. Logic dictates that nothing of value lies at the bottom of such a tight squeeze. Surely no animal would wander there, and surely no human could fit. But curiosity is a powerful lantern. Steven Tucker exhales, emptying his lungs to make his ribcage just a fraction smaller, a trick known only to the spelunker and the escapologist, and begins to slide his body into the crack. He becomes a part of the rock, scraping against the dolomite, descending into a silence that has held its breath for hundreds of thousands of years. He is the first ripple in a still pond, the first disturbance in a time capsule that has been waiting patiently for exactly this moment. As he lowers himself, the beam of his light hits the floor of the chamber below, and the shadows jump back to reveal the impossible. He is not looking at empty rock. He's looking at bones, thousands of them. The beam of the headlamp sweeps across the floor, and the shadows retreat to the corners of the chamber, revealing a sight that defies the logic of the dark. These are not the scattered, gnawed remnants left by a leopard's lunch, nor are they the solitary, tragic remains of a lost explorer who took a wrong turn a century ago. The floor is littered with them. Jawbones, femurs, fragments of skulls, they lie in the dust like discarded porcelain, resting in a silence so profound, it feels sacred. Steven Tucker and Rick Hunter, breathing the recycled air of the deep earth, are the first human beings to lay eyes on this scene in perhaps 250,000 years. But to understand the gravity of this moment, to truly feel the weight of this secret, we must retrace the harrowing needle-thread journey that brought them here. We must understand the chute of silence. The Naledi chamber, as it will come to be named, the Chamber of Stars, is not a place one walks into. It is a fortress protected by the earth itself, a vault designed by geology to keep its contents hidden. To reach this final resting place, the earth demands a toll of physical contortion and absolute mental calm. Let us float back up, moving in reverse like a ghost rewinding time, up through that impossibly narrow vertical fissure, back up the jagged ridge to understand the gauntlet these men have just run. The path to the chamber is a geological obstacle course that seems almost vindictive in its design. Before they even reached the vertical chute, Rick and Steven had to navigate the Superman's crawl. Imagine a tunnel, not arched and welcoming, but flattened like a pancake. It is less than 25 centimeters high, barely 10 inches. To move through it, you must lie flat on your stomach, one arm extended forward like the comic book hero in flight, the other pinned to your side. You cannot lift your head to look forward. You can only drag your body over the cold, damp rock, inch by painful inch, forcing your ribs to compress against the stone. It is a place where the ceiling and the floor seem determined to meet, with you in the middle. It is the sort of place that makes you reconsider every dessert you have ever eaten, and perhaps regret that extra slice of toast at breakfast. After surviving the crawl, the cave opens up slightly, but only to present a new challenge. The Dragon's Back. This is a soaring ridge of rock, sharp and serrated, that rises up toward the ceiling of a larger chamber. It looks like the fossilized spine of a great subterranean beast, frozen in mid-writhe. To cross it, one must balance on the knife edge with drops into black chasms on either side. The humidity here is nearly 100%. The air is thick, wet, and heavy, clinging to the skin like a warm, damp cloth. Every surface is slick with moisture. The only sound is the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water filtering down from the world above, counting out the seconds of millennia. It is a hypnotic, lonely sound, the heartbeat of the cave. And then, at the top of the dragon's back, lies the chute. This is the true gatekeeper. It is a vertical chimney, a jagged throat of dolomite and chert that drops 12 meters, nearly 40 feet, straight down. But it is not a clean drop. It is a twisted, fractured passage that narrows to that impossible 18 centimeters. 18 centimeters is the width of a standard envelope. It is the width of a spread human hand. It is not the width of a human body. Yet, this is the only way in. Geologists and cave mappers have scoured the system, tapping walls and analyzing airflow, searching for a back door or a collapsed skylight that might explain how these bones arrived here. Historians and critics still argue whether a more accessible entrance might have existed 300,000 years ago, perhaps a shaft that has since been sealed by shifting sediment or collapsing rock. It is a comforting thought that there was once an easy walk-in entrance, a sunlit path that closed over time. But the geology of the rising star system is stubborn. The flowstone formations, the lack of debris cones that usually form under open shafts, and the specific sediment layers suggest that the cave has been sealed and difficult to access for millions of years. The chute was likely always the chute, a terrifying, tight squeeze in the dark. Descending this chute requires a paradoxical state of mind, high alert mixed with total relaxation. If you panic, your muscles tense. If your muscles tense, your chest expands. If your chest expands, you get stuck. Rick and Steven, experienced as they are, know that the rock does not care about their fear. They must become fluid. They exhale, emptying their lungs to shrink their rib cages, and slide down, twisting their bodies to align their shoulders with the widest parts of the crack. The rock here is rough, biting into fabric and skin, a tactile reminder that this place was not built for soft, fleshy things. It is a vertical wrestle with gravity and geology. As they descend, their headlamps illuminate only inches of gray rock in front of their noses. The darkness below is absolute, a velvet void waiting to catch them. When Steven finally drops from the chute and his boots touch the soft, dusty floor of the Naledi chamber, the transition is jarring. He is moved from the constriction of the chute into a cathedral of silence. The chamber is not enormous, roughly the size of a modest living room, but after the squeeze, it feels vast. The air is still, stale, and incredibly old. It tastes of dust and time. There is no sound of wind, no chirping of crickets, no hum of the city. Just the silence of the deep earth, a silence so thick you can almost hear the blood rushing in your own ears. It is here, in this isolated pocket of reality, that the bones wait. They are everywhere. They are not encased in stone like dinosaur fossils. They are lying on the surface of the sediment or partially buried, as if they were placed there only yesterday. The fragility of the scene is terrifying. One careless step could crush a jawbone that holds the secrets of human origins. Rick and Steven move with the exaggerated caution of mimes, their lights dancing over the scatter. They do not touch. They only look. The magnitude of what they have found begins to settle in their chests, heavier than the bad air. This is not a random animal den. There are no remains of lions, hyenas, or owls, the predators that typically drag bones into caves. Those animals leave messy signatures, gnaw marks, crushed bones, a chaotic mix of species. This chamber is a monochrome portrait. Only one type of creature is here. The realization is a cold shiver down the spine. If there is no other entrance, and if no predators brought them here, then these beings, whoever they were, must have come here themselves, or were brought here by others, through the dragon's back, through the chute. The thought seems impossible. The physical feat required to get a body down that chute is immense for a modern caver with ropes and lights. For an ancient hominin, presumably without high-tech gear, it is unimaginable. The men snap photos, their cameras clicking loudly in the hush, capturing the evidence that will soon set the scientific world on fire. They know they cannot stay long. The psychological weight of the cave is pressing down, and the journey out is just as difficult, perhaps harder, as they must now fight gravity to climb back up the chute. They begin the ascent, a grueling vertical worm dance, pushing against the rock, finding purchase on tiny ledges with their toes. They squeeze back through the 18-centimeter pinch point, their breath coming in ragged gasps, dragging their bodies back toward the world of the living. Emerging from the cave hours later, they are covered in the red dust of the cradle, looking like men born of the earth itself. The sun is setting now, casting long, bruising purple shadows across the savannah. The world above has not changed. The birds still call, the wind still rustles the acacia leaves, the stars are beginning to prick the twilight sky. But for Rick and Stephen, everything has changed. They carry a secret that burns in their pockets. They make their way to Lee Berger, the National Geographic explorer in residence, a man whose career has been defined by big bets and bigger discoveries. They show him the photos on a small digital screen. The images are grainy, lit by the harsh glare of headlamps, but the shapes are unmistakable. A jaw, a skull fragment, a femur. Berger looks and then looks again. He sees the primitive ridge of the brow, the curve of the jaw. He knows instantly that the impossible has happened. The rising star has given up a ghost. But as he stares at the photos, a practical problem looms large, a problem that brings a wry smile to his face. The fossils are fantastic, yes, but they are behind a torture chamber of rock. Rick and Stephen are thin, wiry men, and they barely fit. Most of the paleoanthropologists Berger knows are, to put it politely, built for the lecture hall, not the needle's eye. If he wants those bones, he doesn't just need scientists. He needs something else entirely. He needs a new breed of explorer. Lee Berger stood before a dilemma that felt almost mythological in its irony. He held the keys to one of the most significant paleoanthropological sites in history, a time capsule locked in stone, but he was physically barred from entering it. He was a man of average build, broad-shouldered and tall, a stature that effectively exiled him from the Naledi chamber. The dragon's back would stop him, the Superman's crawl would trap him, the chute would simply laugh at him. The standard procedure in archaeology when faced with a difficult site is to blast, to widen, to break the rock to suit the human. But Berger knew that Rising Star was different. The cave was not just a container, it was part of the story. To blast an entrance would be to destroy the context, potentially crushing the fragile clues that lay in the sediment. He needed a surgeon's touch, not a miner's dynamite. He needed a team of excavators who possessed a rare dual competency: the mind of a high-level paleoanthropologist and the body of a cavern-dwelling contortionist. He needed scientists who could squeeze through an 18-centimeter gap, dangle 40 feet in the dark, and then have the composure to excavate paper-thin fossils with a paintbrush. And so, he did something unprecedented in the secretive, often jealous world of high-stakes science. He turned to social media. On October 6, 2013, he posted an advertisement on Facebook. It read like a casting call for a science fiction movie or a very specific sort of spy mission. The requirements were stark: master's degree or higher in paleoanthropology or related field, caving experience. Must be fit and not claustrophobic. And then, the kicker, the detail that made people pause while scrolling through their feeds. The catch is this: the person must be skinny and preferably small. It was a request that stripped away the ego of the field. It didn't ask for the most published author or the most tenured professor. It asked for the ones who could fit. The response was immediate and overwhelming. In the world of academia, where opportunities to work on a discovery of this magnitude are rarer than diamonds, the post went viral. Applications flooded in from around the globe. From this deluge of hopefuls, 6 candidates emerged. They were all women. This wasn't a political statement or a calculated PR move. It was simply a matter of biomechanics. In the lottery of human variation, women were more likely to possess the narrow shoulders and hip girdles necessary to slip through the stone throat of the rising star. They came from the United States, Canada, and Australia. Marina Elliott, Becca Peixoto, Aaliyah Gurtov, Ellen Feuerriegel, Hannah Morris, and Kay Lindsay Hunter. They would soon be christened the Underground Astronauts, a title that perfectly captured the otherworldly nature of their mission. They were voyagers traveling to a dark alien landscape right here on Earth, tethered to the surface only by miles of fiber optic cable and the fragile thread of their own courage. November in the South African cradle of humankind is a time of heat and potential storms. The team established a command center that looked like a cross between a military field hospital and a high-tech startup. Tents mushroomed in the dry grass. Generators hummed a constant, low-frequency bass line beneath the sounds of the bush. Monitors were stacked on folding tables, flickering with the live feeds from the cameras that had been snaked deep into the cave. This was the Mission Control. Here, the senior scientists, including Berger, would sit like generals in a bunker, watching the excavation unfold on screens, communicating with the women below via headsets. It was a strange, disjointed way to do science, the brain above, the hands below, but it created a profound bond between the surface and the deep. When the time came for the first descent, the air in the camp was thick with a quiet electric tension. The women suited up in blue coveralls, helmets and heavy boots, armor for the underworld. They checked their lights, their harnesses, their excavation kits. There's a specific kind of quiet that falls over a group before they do something dangerous. The jokes fade away, replaced by the soft clicks of buckles and the rustle of nylon. One by one, they slipped into the cave mouth, disappearing from the bright, harsh African sun into the cool, eternal twilight of the limestone. We follow them now, not as intruders, but as silent observers floating in their wake. Watch as they navigate the initial passages. It is not a graceful walk. It is a scramble, a slide, a constant negotiation with the rock. They reach Superman's crawl. To the uninitiated, the name suggests flight. To the caver, it implies crushing confinement. Marina Elliott, the first to go in, drops to her belly. The ceiling is so low that her helmet scrapes the rock with a sound like grinding teeth. She must turn her head to the side, pressing her cheek against the damp, gritty floor, and push with her toes. The dust rises, coating her eyelashes, filling her nose with the scent of old earth. For a few meters, the rock hugs her tight, a stone embrace that would send a claustrophobe into a screaming panic. But she is calm. She focuses on her breathing, slow, rhythmic, shallow, in, out, push, in, out, push. They emerge from the crawl, dusty and sweating, only to face the dragon's back. The cameras back at the surface show grainy, jerking images of their progress. The scientists in the command tent lean forward, holding their breath as they watch the lights bob and weave along the knife-edge ridge. The drop-offs on either side are invisible in the darkness, swallowed by the void, but the women know they are there. They move with deliberate precision, checking every handhold, testing every foothold. A loose rock here could mean a broken ankle, and a broken ankle in this place is a logistical nightmare. Finally, they stand at the top of the chute. This is the bottleneck, the guardian of the chamber. Looking down, it seems impossibly small, a jagged crack that twists out of sight. It is the sort of place that instinct screams at you to avoid. It looks like a trap. But the voice in their earpieces is calm, guiding them, reminding them of the prize that lies below. The first astronaut prepares to descend. She clips into the safety line, though the rope is there mostly for emergency extraction. The descent itself is a physical shimmy. She exhales, making herself small, and lowers her legs into the fissure. The rock presses against her chest, her back, her hips. She is a puzzle piece forcing herself into a slot that barely fits. She must twist her body, rotating her shoulders to bypass a protrusion of chert, then exhale again to slide down another foot. It is a slow, intimate dance with the geology. Down, down, down. 12 meters of vertical squeezing. The darkness is absolute, save for the cone of light from her headlamp, which illuminates only the few inches of gray rock in front of her face. And then, the pressure releases. Her boots touch soft earth. She unclips, steps back, and looks up. High above, a sliver of light marks the world she has left behind. She turns her head, and her light sweeps across the Naledi chamber. The floor is exactly as Rick and Stephen described it, a boneyard. But now, with the trained eyes of a scientist, the chaos resolves into clarity. These are not just rocks, they are the architecture of a lost people. A skull cap rests near a wall, its curve smooth and hauntingly familiar. A set of teeth grins from the dirt, white against the red sediment. The headset crackles. "I'm in," she whispers, her voice echoing slightly in the small chamber. It's full of them. Back on the surface, a cheer erupts in the command tent, a release of tension that startles the birds in the nearby trees. But in the chamber, there is no cheering, just the heavy, reverent silence of the grave. The other women descend one by one, dropping from the ceiling like spiders on a thread. The team gathers in the small space, their lights crossing like lightsabers in the dust. They are standing in a place that has been dark for hundreds of thousands of years, and they are about to touch the past. They unpack their brushes and their bamboo picks. The real work, the delicate, painstaking surgery of removing history from the earth, is about to begin. They are the first human women to stand here. Perhaps the first humans of any kind to stand here since the last of the star people laid their burden down. The Naledi chamber does not give up its secrets easily, but it welcomes those who are patient. As the team of 6 women settles into the confined space, the atmosphere shifts from the adrenaline of the descent to the meditative rhythm of discovery. The chamber itself is a geological paradox. It feels both suffocatingly small and spiritually vast. It is roughly 11 meters long and barely 2 meters wide in some places, a narrow gallery carved by water that vanished aeons ago. The walls are draped in flowstone, cascading sheets of calcite that look like frozen waterfalls or the melted wax of a giant candle, shimmering wetly in the LED beams. The air here is distinct, lacking the metallic tang of the surface. It smells of damp clay and a profound, dust-heavy neutrality. It is the scent of a room that has not been opened since the dawn of humanity. The excavation begins not with shovels, but with toothpicks and porcupine quills. To use anything heavier would be an act of violence against the past. The floor is so densely packed with fossils that there is almost no place to put a foot down without stepping on a piece of history. The scientists must contort themselves into impossible yoga positions, hovering over the sediment, their muscles trembling with the effort of holding still. They work in a hush, the silence broken only by the soft shh of brushes sweeping away the red dirt and the occasional click of a camera shutter. Every grain of sand removed is a revelation. In most paleoanthropological digs, finding a single femur is a career-defining moment, a cause for champagne and press conferences. Here, femurs are almost commonplace. They are stacking up like firewood. The richness of the site is overwhelming. A problem that scientists dream of but rarely encounter. There is simply too much to document. As Becca Pichotto gently brushes away a layer of silt near the center of the chamber, a shape emerges that causes the entire team to freeze. It is not a random fragment, it is a hand. But it is not a scattered pile of finger bones, it is articulated. The bones are lying in their correct anatomical positions, the thumb curved in toward the palm, the fingers slightly flexed as if grasping a ghost. This is a discovery of immense significance. In the violent, tumbling world of caves, water usually rushes in, churning bones into a chaotic soup, separating hands from arms and heads from spines. To find a hand still connected means that the body was likely intact when it arrived here, and that it was not subjected to the violent washing of a flood. It lay where it fell, undisturbed by water or beast, while the flesh slowly melted away, leaving the bones in a perfect skeletal echo of the gesture. The team works in shifts, battling the carbon dioxide that builds up in the bottom of the cave. The air is heavy, making the brain sluggish, a constant reminder that they are guests in a hostile environment. They communicate with the surface via the fiber optic cables, their voices tinny and distant in the command tent headsets. Lee Berger and the senior team watch on the monitors, seeing the bones emerge in real time. It is a strange, disembodied form of leadership, the mind on the surface guiding the hands in the deep. They joke to break the tension, small quips about the endless dust or the desire for a cheeseburger, but the humor is soft, a way to keep the darkness at bay. There's a profound sense of intimacy in the chamber. The excavators are kneeling in the grave of a species, touching the remains of individuals who likely died together or were placed here over generations. They assign nicknames to the skeletons to humanize them, to bridge the gap of 300,000 years. Neo, Curious, and others become silent companions in the dark. What becomes apparent as the days turn into weeks is the sheer volume of the find. By the end of the expedition, they have cataloged over 1,550 distinct fossil elements. It is the largest single collection of hominin fossils ever found in Africa. Usually, we build our understanding of ancient humans from scraps: a jawbone from Ethiopia, a skull cap from Java, a few teeth from Europe. We paste these fragments together and hope they belong to the same picture. But Rising Star is different. It is not a scrap, it is a library. The team recovers parts of at least 15 individuals. There are infants, their tiny bones fragile as eggshells. There are juveniles, caught in the awkward growth spurts of youth. There are adults and old individuals, their bones showing the wear and tear of a hard life. It is a complete demographic slice of a population. The preservation is haunting. There are no bite marks from hyenas or leopards, the great bone crunchers of the savannah. There are no signs of weathering from the sun. The bones are pristine, white and stark against the red cave earth. This absence of damage is a clue as loud as a shout. If a predator had dragged these bodies in, the bones would be gnawed and scattered. If they had fallen into a death trap, there would be other animals, antelope, baboons, hares, that fell in with them. But the Naledi chamber is exclusive. Aside from a few isolated rodent and bird bones that likely wandered in and died, it is a Homo Naledi only club. This exclusivity deepens the mystery. How did 15 people of all ages end up in a box of rock accessible only by a vertical chute? As the excavation progresses, the team begins to lift the bones from their resting places. This is a process of extreme delicacy. Using consolidants and hardening agents, they stabilize the fossils before moving them. Each bone is wrapped in bubble wrap and placed in a hard plastic container, a lunchbox for the dead. Then comes the reverse journey. The containers are passed hand to hand up the vertical chute, across the dragon's back, through the Superman's crawl. It is a bucket brigade of history. The containers emerge into the sunlight, squinted at by the team on the surface who treat them like holy relics. When the first skull is fully pieced together in the lab tent, the silence that falls over the camp is different from the silence of the cave. It is the silence of confusion. The face staring back at them is not what they expected. The skull is small, creating a silhouette that looks ancient. But the brow ridges are distinct, and the shape of the face is strangely familiar. It doesn't fit the timeline. The geology suggests the cave is old, but the preservation feels young. The mosaic nature of the discovery begins to dawn on them. They are not looking at a linear step in the ladder of progress. They are looking at a creature that seems to have walked out of a time machine, a being that borrowed parts from the deep past and parts from the future. The sheer quantity of bones allows for a statistical certainty that is rare in paleoanthropology. This isn't a single freak individual. This is what they all looked like. The consistency is absolute. As the final bags are hauled out and the cave is sealed once more to protect what remains, the focus shifts from the physical labor of the underground astronauts to the intellectual labor of the laboratory. The fossils are cleaned, scanned, and printed in 3D. They are sent to experts around the world, teeth to the tooth people, feet to the foot people. The data begins to stream back, and with it, a picture of a creature that defies easy categorization. The Naledi chamber has emptied its first offering into the hands of science, but it has filled the minds of the researchers with a storm of questions. We leave the cool, damp dark of the cave now, following the bones into the bright, sterile light of the laboratory, where the true strangeness of the Starman begins to take shape. The puzzle pieces are all on the table, but the picture they form is one that nobody in the history of science has ever seen before. The dust of the cave has been brushed away, and the silence of the Naledi chamber has been replaced by the sterile, focused hum of the laboratory at the University of the Witwatersrand. Here, under the unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights, the underground astronauts and a global team of specialists begin the second phase of the journey, the reconstruction. It is a puzzle of agonizing complexity. Imagine trying to assemble a complex machine for which the blueprints were lost 250,000 years ago. Now, imagine that the parts seem to have been drawn from two completely different machines. One a vintage model from the dawn of time, the other a sleek modern prototype. This is the anatomical paradox of Homo naledi. As the bones are laid out on velvet-lined trays, arranged from skull to toe, a picture emerges that disrupts the comfortable linear story of human evolution we have told ourselves for decades. We like to imagine our history as a straight line, a march of progress, where our ancestors gradually stood taller, their brains grew larger, and their ape-like features faded away in perfect synchronization. Homo naledi stands in the doorway of science and politely suggests that we have been wrong. The term scientists use is mosaic. It is a beautiful word for a confusing reality. It means that this creature is not a missing link, a term that implies a halfway point between ape and human, but rather a chimera, a creature built from a grab bag of evolutionary traits. If you were to see Homo naledi walking across the twilight savanna in the distance, you might easily mistake them for a small human. They walked on two legs with a stride that was efficient and familiar. But if you were to approach them, the illusion would shatter in stages, revealing a body that belongs to no single epoch. Let us construct this being, piece by piece, as the scientists did. We start with the torso. If you are a modern human, your rib cage is shaped like a barrel, cylindrical and uniform. This shape allows your chest to expand and contract independently of your arm movements, a crucial adaptation for a creature that runs and breathes heavily. But the rib cage of Homo naledi is different. At the top it is narrow, but as it descends, it flares outward like a bell or a cone. This is a primitive trait, a direct callback to the Australopithecines, like the famous Lucy, who lived millions of years earlier. This flared shape accommodates a large digestive tract, suggesting a diet that required a lot of processing, perhaps relying on lower-quality fibrous plants. Attached to this ancient rib cage are shoulders that seem to shrug at the modern world. The shoulder joint, the glenoid fossa, is oriented slightly upward. In you and me, the shoulder socket faces out to the side, allowing us to throw a baseball or swing a hammer. In Homo naledi, the upward tilt is a clear signature of a climber. It is the shoulder of a creature accustomed to hanging, reaching, and pulling itself up into the canopy. It whispers of a life that was not entirely grounded. Moving down the spine to the pelvis, the confusion deepens. The human pelvis is a bowl, short and wide, designed to support our internal organs while we walk upright. The pelvis of Homo naledi is flared widely at the sides, the iliac blades jutting out. It is a starkly archaic architecture, almost identical to the hips of hominins that went extinct 2 million years ago. When the team first analyzed the pelvis, they were certain they were dealing with a creature of deep antiquity. This must be an Australopith, one might say, looking only at the hips. It must be 2 million years old, but evolution is a trickster. Because attached to these ancient hips are legs that are undeniably long, lean, and modern. The femur, or thigh bone, is the pillar of bipedalism. In Homo naledi, the femur is light and slender, distinct from the thick, robust leg bones of Homo erectus. It angles inward from the hip to the knee, the valgus angle, which places the feet directly under the body's center of gravity. This is the hallmark of an obligate biped, a creature that doesn't just walk on two legs occasionally, but does so as its primary mode of transport. They were walkers, they were wanderers, and they walked on feet that are, for all intents and purposes, your feet. The foot of Homo naledi is perhaps the most modern part of the entire package. If you were to find one of their footprints in the mud, you would be hard-pressed to distinguish it from that of a small modern human wearing a size 4 shoe. It has a non-divergent big toe, meaning the toe is in line with the others, not sticking out like a thumb as it does in chimpanzees. It has a rigid arch, a shock absorber for long-distance travel. The ankle joint is built for stability. Evolution seems to have decided that the foot was a solved problem, copying the design almost exactly, even while retaining the primitive hips and shoulders. It is as if nature was building a hot rod, putting a brand new engine and tires on a chassis from a Model T Ford. This jarring mix of features led to intense debate within the scientific community. When the findings were first published, skeptics raised their eyebrows. Some argued that this wasn't a new species at all, but rather a pathological population of Homo erectus, a group of individuals who suffered from a developmental disease like cretinism or microcephaly, which might explain the small heads and odd proportions. It is a valid scientific question. Are we looking at a species or a sick family? But the Rising Star Cave provided the answer in the form of sheer numbers. We have remains from infants, children, adults, and the elderly. They all share the same features: the weird shoulder, the flared hip, the curved fingers. They are consistent across every single individual. Diseases are rarely so uniform. A pathology doesn't create a perfect functional mosaic across an entire population. This was not a sick version of us. It was a healthy version of them. The hands of Homo naledi deserve a special pause in our reconstruction. They are the ultimate tools of interaction, the bridge between the mind and the world. The wrist and the palm are exquisitely modern, capable of the precision grip, the ability to pinch a small object between the thumb and forefinger. They had the anatomy to make tools, to manipulate the environment, perhaps even to craft. And yet, look closely at the fingers. The proximal phalanges, the finger bones closest to the palm, are curved, not slightly bent but significantly curved like the ribs of a small boat. This curvature is a specific adaptation for gripping branches. It provides a powerful locking hook for climbing. So we have a hand that says toolmaker in the palm and tree climber in the fingers. It is a hand built for two worlds, refusing to choose between the safety of the trees and the opportunity of the ground. As the reconstruction stands complete in our mind's eye, Homo naledi appears as a creature of the threshold. Standing just under 5 feet tall, wiry, and strong, they possess a grace that is difficult to capture in static bones. We often think of primitive humans as hulking, stooped, and clumsy, but Homo naledi would have been agile. Their light frame and long legs suggest they were quick. Their powerful shoulders and curved fingers suggest they were acrobatic. They were likely efficient runners on the flat plains of the Highveld, yet capable of vanishing into the canopy in seconds if a lion roared in the tall grass. This mosaic anatomy forces us to abandon the idea that evolution updates the whole body at once. It doesn't. Evolution is a tinkerer, not an engineer. It modifies the foot to walk, but leaves the shoulder to climb if climbing is still useful. It shrinks the jaw, but keeps the hips wide if that works. Homo naledi is a testament to the success of good enough. They didn't need to be fully modern to survive. They just needed to be the best version of themselves. They were a successful experiment that ran parallel to our own lineage, a different way of being human that persisted for hundreds of thousands of years. They were not failed ancestors, they were successful cousins. And yet, for all the intrigue of the hips and the hands, there is one part of the Homo naledi puzzle that casts the longest shadow. It is the part that defines us, the part we prize above all else. Resting atop this mosaic body, supported by a spine that looks very much like ours, is a skull that houses a mystery smaller than an orange, yet deeper than the ocean. The skull of Homo naledi sits in the palm of a scientist's hand, light as a ceramic cup, delicate and disarming. If you were to hold it, you would feel the smoothness of the bone, stained the color of rust by the cave sediment, and you would be struck by a profound contradiction. The face looking back at you has the vertical forehead and the delicate eyebrows of a relative. But the cranial vault, the casing that held the mind, is shockingly small. It is roughly the size of a large grapefruit or a very modest orange. In terms of raw numbers, the cranial capacity hovers between 465 and 560 cubic centimeters. To put that in perspective, your brain is likely 3 times that size, ranging from 1,200 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. For decades, paleoanthropology was guided by a simple, almost arrogant rule known as the cerebral Rubicon. This was the idea that there was a magic number, usually around 750 or 900 cubic centimeters, that served as the entry ticket to humanity. Below that line, you were a clever ape. Above it, you were a human. We liked this rule because it flattered us. It suggested that our intelligence was simply a matter of volume, that we were smarter because we had more stuff inside our heads. Homo naledi broke this rule and then gently hid the pieces in the dark. The discovery of such a small brain in a creature that lived so recently, overlapping with the earliest dawn of our own species, forced a complete reevaluation of what creates intelligence. Was it possible that we had been measuring the wrong thing? To answer this, researchers didn't just look at the size of the skull, they looked at the shape of the nothingness inside it. When a brain grows, it presses against the developing bone of the skull, leaving faint impressions of its surface, the hills and valleys of the cortex, on the inner wall of the cranium. These impressions are called endocasts. By scanning the interior of the Homo naledi skulls, scientists were able to create a digital ghost brain, a 3D map of the mind that once powered this enigmatic creature. What they found on the screen made the small size irrelevant. The ghost brain was small, yes, but it was incredibly complex. It was not the smooth, simple brain of a chimpanzee or an Australopithecine. It was a miniaturized version of a human brain. The structural organization was shockingly modern. Specifically, the researchers looked at the frontal lobes, the area of the brain that sits right behind your forehead. This is the CEO of the brain, the seat of abstract thought, planning, decision-making, and, crucially, language. In Homo naledi, the inferior frontal gyrus, the region that corresponds to Broca's area in humans, was expanded and complex. In modern humans, Broca's area is vital for the production of speech. Finding this specific structural complexity in Naledi was like opening the hood of a tiny toy car and finding a fully functioning Ferrari engine inside. This revelation dismantled the idea that bigger is always better. It suggested that Homo naledi had undergone a different kind of evolutionary engineering. While our ancestors were evolving larger and larger computers, consuming massive amounts of energy to run them, Homo naledi seems to have evolved a high-efficiency microchip. They achieved advanced cognitive function not by adding more brain tissue, but by rewiring the tissue they had more efficiently. It is a humbling thought. We often assume that a large brain is the only solution to survival, but brains are metabolically expensive. They are greedy organs. Your brain is only about 2% of your body weight, yet it demands 20% of your energy. It wants all the cheeseburgers. Perhaps Homo naledi, living in a resource-unpredictable environment, found a way to be smart without the high-caloric price tag. They were the eco-friendly model of the genus Homo. The implications of this microbrain are staggering. The structure suggests they were capable of complex behaviors that we previously thought were exclusive to big-brained humans. The organization of the frontal, parietal, and temporal lobes hints at the ability to integrate sensory information, to understand spatial relationships, and perhaps even to communicate with a sophisticated system of sounds or gestures. Historians and neurologists still argue whether Homo naledi had language in the way we understand it, with syntax and grammar, or if they used a complex proto-language. But given the darkness of the Rising Star Cave, communication would have been essential. You cannot navigate a pitch-black labyrinth with a torch in one hand and a dragging body in the other without being able to say to your companion, "Watch out for that drop," or "Hold the light steady." The silence of the cave would have been filled with their voices, soft echoes bouncing off the limestone. There is also a fascinating quirk in the back of their brains. The endocasts reveal a lunate sulcus, a deep fissure found in primate brains that has been pushed far back, a position similar to that in modern humans. This shift indicates an expansion of the parietal and occipital regions, areas associated with visual processing and tool use. This is the part of the brain that helps you understand where your hand is in relation to the object you want to pick up. It is the part of the brain that allows a craftsman to visualize a tool inside a rough stone. And this brings us to a profound realization. Homo naledi was not just a wandering animal reacting to the world. They were planners. They were thinkers. They likely had moments of introspection, perhaps looking up at the stars from the entrance of their cave and wondering, just as we do, what the lights were. The small brain also challenges our assumptions about emotional depth. For a long time, we hoarded the concept of feelings for ourselves. We assumed that grief, empathy, and social bonding required a massive neocortex. But the behavioral evidence from the cave, the deliberate disposal of the dead, suggests that Homo naledi felt deeply. They cared for their group members enough to undertake dangerous journeys to secure their remains. This requires a level of social intelligence that is largely independent of brain volume. It comes from the wiring of the emotional centers, the limbic system, which seems to have been robust. They were likely a highly social species, relying on each other for survival, sharing food and comforting one another in the cold, high-veld nights. It is easy to look at the numbers, 465 cubic centimeters, and dismiss them. But numbers are cold things. The reality of the Homo naledi mind is warm and vibrant. Imagine a creature with the curiosity of a human child, the cunning of a survivalist, and the emotional bonds of a close-knit family, all packed into a head no bigger than a softball. It is a reminder that nature is infinite in its creativity. It produced the whale with its massive brain, the raven with its tiny but brilliant brain, and Homo naledi, the clever shadow in the human family tree. They remind us that the spark of humanity does not require a bonfire. A small, intense flame can light the way just as well. As we hold this digital ghost brain in our minds, we begin to see Homo naledi not as a primitive relic, but as a sophisticated contemporary. They were navigating the same landscape as our ancestors, solving the same problems of hunger, predators, and shelter, but solving them with a different set of cognitive tools. They were the Mac to our PC, different operating system, different hardware, but capable of processing the world in rich, high-definition detail. And just as the brain imagines the tool, the body must build it. The complex wiring of the Naledi brain needed an instrument to interact with the physical world, an interface to turn thoughts into actions. And for that, we must look away from the skull and down to the hands. Hands that tell a story of a life suspended between the canopy and the earth. Hands that were capable of holding the future in a curved, powerful grip. To understand the daily life of Homo naledi, you must first understand their hands, for the hand is the primary agent of human will. It is the tool that builds all other tools. The hand of the starman is one of the most confusing and beautiful structures found in the Rising Star Cave, a biological riddle wrapped in skin and bone. If you were to reach across the millennia and shake hands with a Homo naledi individual, the first thing you would notice is the strength of the grip. It would be firm, unyielding, the handshake of someone who has spent a lifetime pulling their own body weight against gravity. But as you pulled away, you would feel the strange geometry of their fingers, long, slender, and curled, lingering on your palm like the memory of a branch. The discovery of the hand bones was a moment of pure serendipity for the underground astronauts. In the Naledi chamber, amidst the jumble of ribs and vertebrae, they uncovered a nearly complete right hand, articulated in the sediment as if it had been resting on the chest of the deceased. It is rare to find hand bones connected. They are small, numerous, and usually the first things to be scattered by water or scavengers. To find the carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges all in a row is like finding a sentence written in the dust that hasn't been erased by the wind. Let us look closely at this hand. The wrist is a marvel of modern engineering. The carpal bones, the cluster of small, pebble-like bones at the base of the hand, are shaped almost exactly like yours and mine. They are tightly packed, forming a rigid, stable base that can support heavy loads and absorb the shock of impact. This boot-shaped trapezoid bone is a telltale sign of a tool user. It allows the wrist to lock, providing the stability needed to pound a rock against a nut or drive a flake of stone into a carcass. The thumb, too, is strikingly human. It is long, powerful, and muscular, capable of opposing the other fingers. This opposition is the key to the precision grip, the ability to pinch a small object like a seed or a sharp stone flake between the pad of the thumb and the pad of the index finger. It is the grip you use to thread a needle, to hold a pen, or to turn a key. If you stopped your examination at the wrist and thumb, you would swear this was the hand of a craftsman, a being who spent their days manufacturing complex stone tools, whittling wood, and manipulating the fine textures of their world. But then you look at the fingers. The proximal phalanges, the first segment of the fingers, are extremely curved. The degree of curvature is comparable to that of an orangutan, a creature that spends almost its entire life in the canopy. The fingers are also long relative to the palm, giving the hand a spider-like appearance. This is not a subtle feature. It is a specialized adaptation. Curved fingers act like hooks. When a creature with curved fingers grabs a branch, the bones align perfectly with the wood, reducing the muscular effort needed to hang on. It is a locking mechanism provided by nature. This combination, a craftsman's palm with a climber's fingers, paints a vivid picture of Homo naledi's behavior. They were creatures of the in-between. By day, they likely walked the savanna, using their dexterous thumbs to forage for tubers, crack open nuts, or perhaps wield simple stones to break into termite mounds. The wear patterns on their teeth suggest they ate dusty, gritty foods, the kind that require digging and peeling, tasks for which their strong, precise thumbs would have been essential. But when the sun began to dip low, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange, and the large predators, the lions, the leopards, the saber-toothed cats, began to stir in the tall grass, Homo naledi did not stay on the ground. They looked up. We can imagine them retreating to the trees or the rocky cliffs of the cradle of humankind. They would have scrambled up the rough bark or the jagged dolomite with the ease of seasoned acrobats. Their powerful shoulders, tilted upward, would have hauled them up, while those curved fingers locked onto branches and ledges, holding them safe above the danger zone. It is a dual existence, the terrestrial opportunist and the arboreal refugee. This lifestyle might explain their survival alongside larger, more dominant species. While Homo erectus or early Homo sapiens might have dominated the open plains with their spears and scythes, Homo naledi could vanish into the vertical world where the heavy giants could not follow. The question of tool use hangs heavy over the rising star site. To date, no stone tools have been found in the Naledi chamber itself. This is not entirely surprising. If the chamber was a burial site, they may not have buried their dead with their possessions, or perhaps they simply didn't carry tools into the dark. However, the anatomy screams tool user. You don't evolve a complex, energy-expensive thumb and a rigid wrist unless you are doing something that requires force and precision. It is a case of, if you build it, they will come. Or rather, if they built it, they used it. Le cadre de prot. Historians and archaeologists still argue whether the lack of tools is a matter of preservation or culture. But physically, Homo naledi was more than capable of flaking stone. They could have made sharp flakes to slice meat or shaped sticks to dig for water. The capacity was there, written in the bone. There's a tactile softness to this image. The idea of a hand that could be gentle enough to groom the fur of a child, picking out tiny insects with precision, yet strong enough to haul a body up a vertical rock chimney. And perhaps this climbing ability is the key to the mystery of the cave itself. Remember the chute? Remember the dragon's back? For a modern human caver, moving through the rising star system is a terrifying ordeal of ropes and awkward shuffles. But for Homo naledi, with their gripping fingers and climbing shoulders, the dragon's back might not have been an obstacle at all. It might have been a staircase. Imagine them moving through the cave, not with the clumsy caution of a human on a ladder, but with the fluid grace of a creature in its element. They would have gripped the jagged ridges of the Dolomite with those curved fingers, finding purchase where we would find only slippery rock. They could have navigated the vertical drops with a confidence that we can only envy. The cave, to them, was not a trap. It was a sanctuary, a place where their unique anatomy gave them an advantage. Their hands were the keys that unlocked the deep earth. It is also worth noting the sensory implication of these hands. The fingertips of the primates are densely packed with nerve endings. For Homo naledi, the world was a texture to be read. The rough skin of a tuber, the slick wetness of the cave wall, the soft fur of a companion. Their reality was defined by touch. In the pitch black of the Naledi chamber, touch would have become their primary sense. They would have navigated the darkness by feeling the airflow, by tracing the flowstone with those long, curved fingers, creating a mental map of the void through the language of friction and temperature. This duality of the hand, the archaic curve and the modern thumb, is a perfect metaphor for the species itself. They held on to the past with their fingers, keeping the safety of the trees within reach, but they grasped the future with their thumbs, manipulating the world in ways that would eventually lead to the technological explosion of the genus Homo. They were not stuck in the past, they were using it. They were not failing to be modern, they were succeeding at being Naledi. As we let go of their hand, feeling the phantom pressure of that strong, climbing grip fade, we must look down. Because while the hands tell us how they interacted with their world, it is the feet that tell us how they moved through it. The hand is a tool of manipulation, but the foot is a tool of travel. And for a species that lived in the vast open spaces of Africa, the ability to move, to walk, to run, to endure, was the difference between life and death. The feet of Homo naledi are ready to take us on a long journey away from the trees and out into the endless horizon of the grass. If the hand of Homo naledi is a handshake across the divide of species, the foot is a footprint that walks in step with our own. It is, without a doubt, the most startlingly modern piece of the Starman's anatomy. If you were to take the bones of a Homo naledi foot, arrange them in the dust, and ask a podiatrist to examine them without context, they would likely tell you they belong to a small, modern human, perhaps a person who walked a great deal, never wore shoes, and had excellent arches. They might prescribe a good pair of sneakers, but they would not suspect they were looking at a creature with the shoulders of an ape and the brain size of an orange. The foot is the anchor of their humanity, the definitive proof that whatever else they were doing in the trees, they were committed to the ground. Let your gaze drift down from the curved fingers and the climbing shoulders, past the flared, archaic hips, to the ground. Here, the story changes. The foot of Homo naledi is built for the long haul. It possesses a non-divergent hallux, a big toe that stands in line with the others, rather than jutting out to the side like a thumb. In the world of primates, this is a major commitment. A gripping big toe is fantastic for climbing. It allows a chimp to wrap its foot around a trunk and hoist itself up. But on the ground, a gripping toe is a liability. It gets in the way. It flops. To walk efficiently, you need a lever. You need a toe that can push off the earth with force, propelling the body forward. Homo naledi had made that trade. They gave up the foot thumb for the foot lever. Furthermore, the foot possesses a distinct longitudinal arch. This is the spring in your step, the shock absorber that protects the knees and hips from the jarring impact of walking on hard ground. Flat-footed apes tire quickly when walking upright. Their muscles have to do all the work. But with an arch, the foot itself becomes an energy storage device, capturing the energy of the landing and releasing it in the push-off. Evolution, it seems, found the perfect design for a walking foot early on and decided, good enough, let's not mess with it. It is a design so efficient that millions of years later, the only real improvement we have made is the invention of the cushioned insole. The legs attached to these modern feet are long and slender. The tibia, or shin bone, is thin, suggesting a lightness of build. This was not a creature built for brute force wrestling matches on the ground. It was built for endurance. The geometry of the knee and the ankle aligns the legs directly under the body, minimizing the side-to-side swaying that characterizes the waddle of chimpanzees. When Homo naledi walked, they glided. They moved with the efficient, energy-saving stride of a creature that has places to go. And they certainly had places to go. We must place them in their world to understand the necessity of this foot. The cradle of humankind during the Middle Pleistocene was a landscape of dramatic beauty and danger. It was a mosaic environment, patches of dense forest clinging to the river valleys, giving way to vast rolling seas of golden grass on the high veld. It was a world of two-story living. The trees offered safety and fruit, but the grasslands offered tubers, carcasses, and game. To survive here, you had to be a commuter. You had to travel between the islands of resources. A typical day for a Homo naledi clan might involve kilometers of trekking across the open savanna, the sun beating down on their shoulders, the red dust puffing up around their ankles. This is where the efficiency of their walk became their superpower. In the heat of the African day, when the lions and leopards are panting in the shade, unable to move without overheating, the bipedal hominin is king. Standing upright exposes less surface area to the vertical sun. It lifts the head into the cooler, breezier air away from the roasting ground. And with those efficient, spring-loaded feet, Homo naledi could keep moving long after the predators had given up. They could scavenge a carcass at noon, grab the best cuts of meat, and retreat to the safety of the cliffs before the big cats woke up for their evening hunt. It was a niche defined by sweat and endurance. There's a gentle irony in their anatomy, a sort of biological joke. Imagine watching a Homo naledi individual walking away from you. From the waist down, you see a modern human gait, fluid, rhythmic, purposeful. But from the waist up, you see the rolling, swinging gait of an ape, with long arms swinging and shoulders shifting. It is a walk that seems to belong to two different movies playing on the same screen. It challenges our desire for consistency. We want them to be one thing or the other, climbers or walkers. But Homo naledi smiles with those small human-like teeth and asks, why not both? They were the all-terrain vehicles of the Pleistocene. Scholars and biomechanists still debate the specifics of their gait. Did they run? The modern foot suggests they could. The Achilles tendon would have been well developed, acting as a powerful spring for running. The endurance running hypothesis, the idea that humans evolved to run prey to death, might apply here in some form. Perhaps they didn't run down antelope like the taller Homo erectus, but they certainly could have jogged to a fresh kill or sprinted to the safety of a tree. However, their slightly shorter legs compared to ours might have made them less efficient at top speeds. They weren't the Ferraris of the savannah, they were the reliable, fuel-efficient sedans. There is a sensory texture to this walking life that we can almost feel. Imagine the sensation of the high-veld grass brushing against their legs, the sharp, dry tickle of the seed heads. Imagine the feeling of the dolomite rocks under their soles, hard, uneven, and hot. Their feet would have been calloused and tough, a natural leather protecting them from the thorns of the acacia. Walking is a rhythmic, meditative act. It allows the mind to wander. As they trekked across the landscape, did they talk? Did the rhythm of their steps coordinate with the rhythm of their vocalizations? The act of walking together is a bonding experience. It synchronizes the group. It is easy to imagine a line of Homo naledi, small figures in a vast landscape, moving with a singular purpose, their footprints leaving a temporary record of their passage in the sand. But where were they walking to? And more importantly, when were they walking? This is where the story of the foot leads us into the most shocking twist of the Homo naledi narrative. For years, as researchers studied these archaic hips and small brains, they assumed these feet were walking on an ancient Earth, perhaps 2 million years ago. The morphology screamed early ancestor. The flared pelvis, the curved fingers, the tiny brain, it all pointed to a time near the dawn of the genus Homo, a time when our ancestors were just figuring out how to be human. The scientific community was comfortable with this. It made sense. Homo naledi was a weird early experiment that went extinct long ago, a relic, a footnote in the deep past, but the feet were too perfect. They were too modern, and the bones in the cave were too well preserved. There was a tension building in the scientific data, a whisper that something was wrong with the timeline. The underground astronauts had not just brought up bones, they had brought up a paradox. How could a creature that looked so ancient possess a foot that looked so new? And how could their bones lie on the surface of the cave floor, unmineralized, looking as if they had died only a few thousand years ago? The answer lay not in the bones themselves, but in the crystals of the cave and the teeth of the dead. The team needed to know the time. They needed a clock. And when they finally found one, when the results of the radiometric dating came back from the labs, it didn't just move the hands of the clock, it smashed the clock against the wall. The walker of the Highveld was not a ghost from the distant dawn. They were not a missing link lost in the fog of millions of years. They were something far more unsettling. They were our neighbors. For years after the initial discovery, a comfortable assumption settled over the scientific community like a warm blanket. It was the assumption of deep time. Looking at the small brain, the curved fingers, and the flaring hips of Homo naledi, experts nodded sagely and placed them mentally in the era of the Australopithecines, perhaps 2 or even 3 million years ago. They fit perfectly there. They were the primitive ancestors, the rough drafts of humanity that would eventually be smoothed out by evolution into the tall, big-brained conquerors we became. It was a tidy narrative. It made sense. It kept the timeline clean, with the primitive things in the distant past and the advanced things in the present. But science, at its best, is the art of ruining tidy narratives. The bones themselves could not be dated directly because they lacked the collagen necessary for carbon dating, which only works for remains younger than about 50,000 years. To find the true age of the Starman, the team had to interrogate the cave itself. They sent samples of the flowstone, the calcite sheets that had dripped over the fossils, and the teeth of the dead to laboratories around the world. They used a battery of high-tech methods, uranium-thorium dating to measure the radioactive decay in the rocks, electron spin resonance to measure the trapped energy in the tooth enamel, and optically stimulated luminescence to see when the last grains of quartz in the sediment had seen sunlight. To ensure absolute objectivity, the labs conducted blind tests. The researchers didn't know what they were dating. They just measured the ticking of the atomic clocks. In 2017, the results came in. They did not whisper, they screamed. The data from the different labs using different methods all converged on a single undeniable window of time, between 335,000 and 236,000 years ago. The shockwave that ripped through the paleoanthropological community was palpable. This date was not just a little off, it was off by nearly 2 million years. It was as if you had found a living, breathing Tyrannosaurus rex wandering through a modern city park, not as a fossil, but as a contemporary. In the grand scale of evolutionary time, 236,000 years ago is practically yesterday. It is the Middle Pleistocene. It is a time when the Earth looked very much as it does now. But more importantly, it is a time when the African continent was already crowded with giants. By this date, the primitive ancestors were supposed to be long gone. Homo erectus, the tall, wandering toolmaker, had already spread across the globe. Even more startlingly, the lineage that would lead to us, archaic Homo sapiens, was already present in Africa. In Morocco, fossils of early Homo sapiens have been dated to roughly 300,000 years ago. This means that Homo naledi was not a distant ancestor from whom we evolved. They were our neighbors. They were our cousins. They were walking the same earth, drinking from the same rivers, and watching the same stars as the very first members of our own species. This realization shattered the linear march of progress image forever. We have all seen that famous illustration, the chimp on the left slowly standing up, losing hair, and becoming the man with the briefcase on the right. That image implies that only one version of human exists at a time, each replacing the inferior model before it. Homo naledi proved that the human family tree is not a straight trunk. It is a wild, bushy thicket. It suggests that for most of our history, being the only human species on Earth was the exception, not the rule. We are the lonely survivors of a once crowded world. Imagine the landscape of the High Veld in this new light. It is no longer a solitary stage for the rise of Homo sapiens. It is a shared world. In the valleys to the north, perhaps early modern humans are experimenting with complex pigments and new tool technologies. They are tall, dark-skinned, and large-brained. And just a few hundred miles south, in the cradle of humankind, the smaller, small-brained Homo Naledi is thriving. Did they meet? Did they trade glances across a watering hole? Did they fight, or did they ignore each other like different species of antelope? The silence of the fossil record on this interaction is deafening, but the geography demands that their paths must have crossed. The late date also solved the mystery of the fresh appearance of the bones. They looked young because, geologically speaking, they were young. But it deepened the mystery of their anatomy. Why did they keep such small brains? Why did they keep the climbing shoulders? In the evolutionary race, we usually assume that big brains are the winning ticket. We assume that once you get a big brain, you never go back. But Homo Naledi suggests that intelligence is not a one-way street. Perhaps they occupied a specific ecological niche, the woodland scavenger climber, where being small and agile was an advantage. Perhaps a massive energy-hungry brain was a liability in their world. They were not failed humans. They were perfectly adapted Naledi. They were a success story that lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, a tenure that rivals or exceeds our own current time on this planet. Historians and scientists still argue whether Homo Naledi is a relic population, a group that branched off early and stayed unchanged, like a coelacanth in the deep ocean, or if they are a dwarfed lineage that evolved from a larger ancestor to suit a resource-poor environment. But regardless of their origin, their persistence is a testament to resilience. They survived climate shifts, the rise of large carnivores, and the competition of other hominins. They were survivors. The date also forces us to reconsider the artifacts of the Middle Pleistocene. For decades, whenever archaeologists found stone tools from this period, they automatically credited them to archaic humans or early Homo sapiens. We assumed we were the only ones capable of making them. But now we know Homo Naledi was there too, with their dexterous hands and tool-ready wrists. Is it possible that some of the tools we have proudly claimed as our own invention were actually made by the Starman? The lines of authorship in the archaeological record have suddenly become blurred, but the most profound implication of the dating brings us back to the dark. If Homo Naledi lived 300,000 years ago, they lived in a world where fire was known. We know that Homo erectus and early Homo sapiens were using fire by this time. And this brings us to a critical realization about the rising star cave. The Naledi chamber is in the dark zone, total, absolute pitch blackness. You cannot navigate it by touch alone. The drops are too steep, the squeezes too tight. If they were entering this cave repeatedly, and the number of bodies proves they needed light. They could not have relied on sunlight filtering down, because the geometry of the cave blocks it. They could not have relied on moonlight. They must have brought the light with them. The idea of a small-brained hominin wielding the power of fire is a radical one. It challenges our belief that fire was the exclusive tool of the geniuses of the family tree. But the logic is inescapable. To go into the dark, you must carry the sun. And if they carried fire, they carried something else, the ability to conquer fear. Close your eyes and imagine the scene. A group of Homo Naledi gathers at the cave entrance as the sun sets. They are holding torches, bundles of dried grass or branches, flickering with orange flame. The smoke swirls around their small heads. They look into the mouth of the cave, into the throat of the earth. Most animals fear fire. They run from it. Most animals fear the deep dark. They avoid it. But these beings with their orange-sized brains combine the two. They step into the shadow, the firelight casting long, dancing shapes on the limestone walls. They are walking into the underworld, guided by a flame they have tamed. This is not just survival. This is mastery. And as they descend, Carrying their burden into the deep, the light of their torches reveals the next and perhaps greatest mystery of all: why they were going down there in the first place. To understand the courage of Homo naledi, we must first understand the nature of the dark. We are creatures of the sun. We rely on our eyes more than any other sense. They are our primary interface with reality. When the lights go out, we become clumsy, vulnerable, and afraid. But the darkness of a bedroom at night is nothing compared to the darkness of the deep earth. In the Naledi chamber, the darkness is not just an absence of light, it is a physical weight. It is a suffocating velvet hood that erases the world. If you were to stand there without a headlamp, you could hold your hand a millimeter from your face and see absolutely nothing. It is a void that dissolves time and direction. This is the dark zone, a realm where the sun has never touched the walls, not once in the history of the planet. And yet, Homo naledi went there. Not just once, but repeatedly, over generations. The route to the chamber, up the dragon's back and down the chute, is treacherous enough with high-powered LED lights and modern climbing boots. To attempt it in the dark would be suicide. One misstep on the ridge would send you tumbling into a bottomless fissure. One wrong move in the chute would leave you wedged in the rock, unable to see how to free yourself. Therefore, logic dictates a simple but revolutionary conclusion. Homo naledi had harnessed the power of artificial light. They were masters of fire. The control of fire is often cited as the singular technology that made us human. It allowed us to cook food, unlocking calories that grew our brains. It kept the predators at bay. But using fire as a flashlight, as a portable tool for exploration, is a cognitive leap of a different order. It requires planning. You cannot just grab a burning branch from a wildfire and hope it lasts. You must prepare fuel. You must understand that the flame will consume the wood, and you must bring enough to get you there and back. It implies a concept of the future, a mental simulation of the journey before it happens. In 2022, the Rising Star team announced that they had found evidence of this mastery. High on the ceilings of the passages, above the reach of any floodwaters, they identified patches of soot, black carbon residue left by burning torches. On the floor of adjacent chambers, they found concentrations of ash and burnt bone that looked suspiciously like hearths. This evidence suggests that Homo naledi did not just stumble through the dark, they illuminated it. They walked into the belly of the earth carrying the stolen power of the sun. However, science is a rigorous discipline, and this claim has sparked a firestorm of its own. Historians and critics still argue whether the soot is truly ancient or the result of modern explorers and miners who might have entered the upper caves in the last century. They question if the hearths could be natural deposits of manganese or bat guano that degraded over time. It is a valid debate, a necessary skepticism that keeps science honest, but the logistical argument remains the hardest to defeat. Even if the soot is modern, the geography of the cave is not. The bodies are there. The dark is there. Unless Homo naledi had the sonar of a bat, which their skulls definitely do not support, they needed light. Let us drift back into the scene, illuminating it with the flickering, uncertain light of the imagination. Picture a small group of Homo naledi gathering in the twilight of the cave entrance. The air outside is cooling, the crickets beginning their nightly chorus. Inside, the cave breathes a steady, damp draft. They ignite their torches, perhaps bundles of dried wild olive branches or reeds tied with grass, dipped in animal fat to burn slower and brighter. The flame catches, casting long, jumping shadows against the rock. The fire changes their eyes, reflecting in the dark pupils, sparking a determination that transcends the animal instinct to flee. They move into the tunnel. The leader holds the torch high, the smoke trailing back to sting the eyes of those following. The light is dynamic, not static like our electric beams. It pulses. It makes the stalactites look like teeth. It makes the shadows of the rocks leap like predators. It requires constant management. As they reach the dragon's back, the challenge escalates. How do you climb a knife-edge ridge while holding a torch? Do they pass it hand to hand? Do they have a designated light bearer who stands at vantage points, casting a glow for the climbers? The coordination required is immense. It speaks of a language of cooperation, a shared understanding of the goal. I will light the way, you will carry the burden. The sensory experience of this journey would have been intense, the smell of burning wood mixing with the damp metallic scent of the limestone, the crackle of the flame echoing in the tight spaces, louder than a shout, the heat of the fire on their faces contrasting with the cool cave air, and the smoke. Fire in a confined space eats oxygen. As they squeezed through the tunnels, the air would have grown thick and hazy. They were not just battling the terrain, they were battling the atmosphere. Yet they pressed on. They didn't turn back. This use of fire redefines the Starman as a technological being. A creature that uses a tool to overcome a physical limitation is a creature that is reshaping its world. If they could light the cave, they could light the night. They could sit around a fire on the surface, extending their day, telling stories, in whatever form their communication took, and bonding in the circle of light. The fire would have been the center of their society, the hearth that warmed their small, wiry bodies and cooked their food, making those gritty tubers easier to chew. But the most haunting question is not how they brought the fire, but why. Why go through this immense effort? Why brave the smoke, the heat, and the terrifying drop? Animals do not go into deep caves for fun. They go to den or to die. But there is no evidence that Homo naledi lived in the Naledi chamber. There are no scattered stone tools from daily work, no piles of food refuse, no signs of sleeping mats. It was not a home. It was a destination. They were carrying fire because they were carrying something else. Something heavy, something precious. The fire was not the point of the journey, it was the means to an end. It was the key to unlocking the dark vault so that they could deposit their cargo, and that cargo was the bodies of their own kind. This brings us to the precipice of the most controversial and emotionally resonant idea in the entire Homo naledi story. We are not looking at a trash chute. We are not looking at a predator's larder. We are looking at a space that was chosen, curated, and visited over centuries. The fire was the torchlight for a procession. The smoke was the incense of a ritual. If the underground astronauts are right, we are standing in the oldest cemetery in the world. And that implies that this small-brained, tree-climbing, fire-wielding hominin did something that we thought was uniquely ours. They mourned. In the quiet dust of the Naledi chamber, we arrive at the heart of the mystery, the place where the science of bones collides with the philosophy of the soul. For centuries, humanity has drawn a line in the sand, a boundary that separates us from the animal kingdom. On one side are the creatures that live, die, and are reclaimed by the earth without ceremony. On the other side is Homo sapiens, the species that weeps, that remembers, that refuses to let go. We bury our dead. We create sacred spaces. We treat the empty shell of the body with reverence because it once held a person we loved. This behavior, we told ourselves, is the hallmark of the human spirit. It requires a brain large enough to understand the concept of mortality, to grasp the finality of death, and to imagine an existence beyond it. Homo naledi, with a brain the size of an orange, stepped over that line in the sand and erased it. The hypothesis proposed by the Rising Star team is radical in its simplicity. This cave was not a trap, nor a dwelling. It was a cemetery. The bodies found here were not washed in by floods. The sedimentology shows no signs of the violent, high-energy water flows that would be needed to flush a corpse down such a complex system. They were not dragged here by predators. There are no gnaw marks, and no lion could fit through the chute. The only remaining explanation, as impossible as it seems, is that Homo naledi deliberately brought their dead here. Consider the physical reality of this act. Anyone who has ever tried to move a sleeping child or help a fainting friend knows the reality of dead weight. A limp body is heavy, awkward, and uncooperative. Now, imagine carrying that weight not down a hallway, but into the Rising Star system. Imagine dragging a deceased clan member, perhaps a father, a sister, or a child, through the Superman's crawl. You are on your belly, pushing the body ahead of you or pulling it behind, dust filling your nose, the rock scraping your skin. Then You reach the dragon's back. You must hoist the body up the jagged ridge, balancing on the knife edge while the torchlight flickers. Finally, the chute. You must lower the body 12 meters down a vertical crack that is barely wide enough for you, let alone a burden. This is not disposal. If you merely wanted to get rid of a rotting body to avoid attracting hyenas to your camp, you would dump it in a bush, or perhaps down the nearest ravine. You wouldn't risk your life to hide it in the hardest-to-reach place in the landscape. The sheer effort implies value. It implies that it mattered where the body ended up. It suggests that the Naledi chamber was a sacred place, a vault of safety where the dead could rest undisturbed by the scavengers of the surface world. The excavation revealed details that support this profound intimacy. In 2017, the team announced the discovery of a second chamber, the Naledi chamber, containing the remains of at least 3 more individuals, including a magnificent male skeleton nicknamed Neo. But even more striking were the specific arrangements found later. In the Naledi subsystem, researchers identified what appeared to be shallow dugout depressions, graves. These are not just bodies lying on the floor. They are bodies placed in oval-shaped pits that were excavated through the cave sediment. One of these features contained the tightly curled body of an adult, their knees drawn up to their chest in the fetal position. This is a classic burial posture seen in ancient human cultures around the world. It mimics the shape of sleep, or perhaps the shape of birth. Another pit contained the remains of a child, their tiny bones fragile as parchment. To dig a hole in the hard-packed clay of the cave floor requires tools and time. It is a deliberate modification of the environment. If Homo Naledi was digging graves, they were not just reacting to death, they were ritualizing it. And then, the walls began to speak. In a twist that shocked even the most open-minded members of the team, Lee Berger and his colleagues identified a series of markings on the dolomite walls near the entrances to the burial chambers. These were not natural cracks or scratches from bear claws. They were geometric shapes. Deeply engraved into the rock were cross-hatchings, lines intersecting to form hashtags, squares, and triangles. The rock surface had been smoothed and prepared before the engraving, a process that would have taken hours of repetitive rubbing with a harder stone. These markings, if truly made by Homo Naledi, represent the crossing of another Rubicon, the creation of art and symbol. A symbol is a thing that stands for something else. A hashtag on a wall is not a tool. It doesn't help you eat or climb. It is an externalized thought. It says, "I was here." Or perhaps, "This place is special," or maybe, "Safe journey." We cannot know the meaning, but the intent is undeniable. This is meaning-making. This is the mind imposing itself on the material world. For a long time, historians and archaeologists argued that symbolic behavior, art, jewelry, grave goods, was the exclusive province of Homo sapiens, appearing only in the last 100,000 years during the creative explosion. The hash marks in the Rising Star Cave, potentially dated to hundreds of thousands of years ago, suggest that the spark of symbolism might be much older and much more widespread than we dared to dream. The emotional implications of these findings are staggering. It forces us to look at Homo Naledi and see not a biological machine, but a being with an interior life. Grief is a heavy emotion. It debilitates. It slows you down. From a purely ruthless evolutionary perspective, grief is inefficient. Why waste energy mourning a member of the pack who can no longer contribute? And yet, here is a species that seemingly built a culture around it. They cared. They bonded so tightly that the severing of that bond by death required a response, a dangerous, exhausting, ritualized response. Imagine the scene in the chamber after the body is lowered. The bearers stand in the flickering torchlight, their chests heaving from the exertion. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of the earth. They look down at the body of their companion, curled in the hollow they have scraped out of the dust. Do they touch them one last time? Do they make sounds, low hums or keenings that echo off the flowstone? The silence of the cave would amplify every breath, every movement. It is a moment of profound vulnerability. In the dark, deep in the earth, they are saying goodbye. This image creates a bridge of empathy that spans 300,000 years. We look at their strange faces, their small heads, and we see ourselves. We see the universal pain of loss. We see the universal need to do something when death strikes, the refusal to let a loved one simply vanish. Whether they believed in an afterlife or spirits or gods, we will never know, but we know that they believed the dead deserved more than the open mouth of a hyena. They believed in dignity. Of course, such a radical rewriting of history does not happen without a fight. The idea that a small-brained hominin could practice mortuary rituals and create art is so disruptive that it has generated a tidal wave of skepticism. It challenges the academic hierarchy. It upsets the established timeline. To claim that Homo Naledi was doing human things before humans were fully human is to knock us off our pedestal. It suggests that the soul, or whatever we choose to call that complex mix of emotion and symbolism, is not a luxury of the big brain, but a fundamental property of the genus Homo. The debate that surrounds these claims is fierce, passionate, and essential. It is the friction that refines the truth. As we stand in the chamber, looking at the depression in the dirt that might be a grave, and the scratches on the wall that might be art, we must also listen to the voices of doubt. For in science, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and there are many who look at the Naledi chamber and see not a cathedral of the dead, but a riddle of nature that has been misread. In the halls of science, a radical new idea is like a flare launched into the night. It illuminates the landscape, revealing things we had never seen before, but it also casts long, sharp shadows. And in those shadows, the skeptics gather. This is not a defect of the scientific method. It is its immune system. When the Rising Star team announced that a small-brained hominin was burying its dead, using fire and carving symbols on cave walls, the reaction from the broader paleoanthropological community was a mixture of awe and fierce resistance. To accept these claims is to rewrite the textbooks of human evolution. And textbooks, much like the professors who write them, are notoriously stubborn things. The whispers of doubt began almost immediately. The primary point of contention is the most human one, the burials. To call a depression in the dirt a grave is to assign intention, ritual, and emotional depth to a creature we barely know. Critics, including renowned experts in taphonomy, the science of how organisms decay and fossilize, have urged caution. They argue that we must first exhaust every possible natural explanation before we leap to the supernatural or the ritualistic. They invoke the null hypothesis, that nature, in its chaotic indifference, is the architect until proven otherwise. One of the loudest alternative theories is the water hypothesis. Is it possible, critics ask, that Homo Naledi didn't walk into the dark at all? Perhaps they died on the surface, near a cave entrance that has since collapsed, and were washed into the depths by a seasonal flash flood. Water is a powerful sorter. It can carry bones through narrow cracks and deposit them in quiet eddies deep underground. If a mudslide or a deluge hit a group of sleeping hominins, it could conceivably tumble them into the chute. However, the Rising Star team has parried this thrust with the rocks themselves. The sediment in the Naledi chamber is fine-grained mud, the kind that settles slowly in still air or very gentle water, not the chaotic jumble of rocks and gravel that a violent flood would bring. Furthermore, a flood is an equal opportunity destroyer. It sweeps up everything in its path: sticks, leaves, antelope bones, stones. Yet, the chamber is remarkably clean. It is a monoculture of Homo Naledi. There is no debris field. If water brought them there, it was a very selective, very polite stream that only liked hominins. Then there is the death trap theory. This posits that the individuals were not carried down, but fell down. Perhaps the chute was a hidden hazard on the surface, a hole in the grass that swallowed the unwary. Over thousands of years, 15 unlucky individuals might have stumbled into the pit, survived the fall, and then crawled into the chamber to die of thirst in the dark. It is a grim image, but the distribution of the bones argues against it. In a natural death trap, you typically find a cone of debris directly under the hole, a pile of bones mixed with the rocks they dislodged. In Naledi, the bones are spread out, and some, like the famous graves, appear to have been manipulated. You do not accidentally fall into a hole and then dig a grave for yourself before you die. The debate over the graves themselves is particularly technical and heated. In 2023 and 2024, following the release of the team's preprints describing the burials, a peer review storm broke out. Independent experts examined the scans and the soil analysis and raised a hand in objection. They pointed out that the disturbed soil of the grave pits might not be the result of digging, but of natural shifting. The cave floor is not concrete. It is soft, wetting and drying over millennia. Water slump, the natural sagging of sediment, could create depression-like shapes around a heavy object like a decomposing body. Furthermore, some critics argue that the fetal position of the skeletons is not necessarily a sign of ritual arrangement. When a body decomposes in a tight space, as ligaments tighten and dry, the limbs can naturally contract into a curled posture. It is a macabre puppetry of physics, not necessarily a gesture of love. The skeptics are not saying the team is wrong. They are saying the evidence is not yet beyond a reasonable doubt. They want to see the shovel marks. They want to see clear chemical proof that the soil in the hole is different from the soil outside it. And what of the art? The hashtags on the wall are perhaps the most vulnerable to critique. Dating rock art is notoriously difficult. You cannot carbon date a scratch. The team estimates the age based on the weathering of the rock and the assumption that Homo naledi was the only creature in the cave capable of making them. But could they be modern? Could a caver in the 1970s or 80s, exploring further than recorded, have idly scratched the wall while taking a break? Or, more surprisingly, could they be natural? Geologists point out that dolomite can fracture in geometric patterns under tectonic stress. Roots from trees on the surface can etch lines into rock as they seek water. The team argues that the preparation of the surface, the smoothing, rules out nature, but the debate rages on. There is a subtle bias at play here, one that historians and philosophers of science love to analyze. We are protective of our specialness. For a long time, we denied that Neanderthals had art or language, only to be proven wrong. Now, we are facing the same gatekeeping with Homo naledi. There is a lingering belief that a brain size of 450 cubic centimeters is simply too small for the hardware required to create symbols. It is brain chauvinism. We assume that complex behavior requires a massive neocortex because we have a massive neocortex. But as we saw with the crow or the octopus, intelligence can be packaged in very different ways. The skeptics argue they are defending the rigor of science. The proponents argue the skeptics are defending the ego of humanity. There is also the Sherpa theory, a lighter, though still skeptical take. Some researchers have jokingly, and not so jokingly, suggested that perhaps Homo naledi didn't have fire or bravery, but rather had a very specific, undiscovered biology, like eyes adapted for low light or a sensory system we don't understand, that made the dark less daunting. Or perhaps there was a back door, a large, easy entrance that has since been perfectly sealed by a landslide, hiding the evidence of the easy way in. It is the most comforting theory because it removes the terror of the chute, but geology is a stubborn witness, and so far, it points to the chute being the only way. This clash of ideas is not a sign of failure. It is the engine of discovery. It forces the Rising Star team to dig deeper, literally and metaphorically. They are currently conducting more microscopic analyses, looking for the chemical signatures of burial and the microstratigraphy of the art. Every critique is a challenge to find better evidence. It is a high-stakes poker game played with bones and dirt. But here is the most important truth that survives the skepticism. Even if you strip away the burials, scrub the art off the walls, and douse the fire, Homo naledi remains an impossible enigma. Even if they didn't bury their dead in a religious sense, the fact remains that 15 individuals ended up deep in a distinct, isolated chamber. Even if they didn't carve the walls, they navigated a labyrinth that would terrify a modern human. Even if they didn't have a funeral, they were doing something social, something coordinated, something that brought them together in the dark. The null hypothesis can explain away a single bone. It cannot easily explain away a cathedral of skeletons. The mystery is robust. It survives the doubts. And as the scientists argue over soil compaction and uranium decay rates in the conference rooms of the surface world, the reality of the past remains quietly waiting in the grass. Because while we debate their intelligence in journals, Homo naledi was out there, living it. They were not waiting for our permission to be complex. Let us leave the courtroom of science for a moment. Let us step away from the microscopes and the heated arguments. Let us go back to the source. Let us return to the landscape of 300,000 years ago, to the tall grass of the cradle. Because the most fascinating part of this story is not what happened in the cave, but what happened outside of it. Homo naledi was not alone. The world was crowded. And on a given Tuesday, under the same hot sun, two very different kinds of human might have walked down the same game trail. One was tall, dark, and destined to conquer the world. The other was small, ancient, and destined for the cave. What happened when they met? The African highveld is a place of grand, indifferent visibility. The grass is low, the sky is vast, and the horizon is a flat line that stretches to the edge of the world. In this landscape, you can see a storm coming from a day away. You can spot a herd of wildebeest as a smear of ink on the horizon. It is a stage built for confrontation. And it is here, on this exposed platform roughly 300,000 years ago, that the most haunting scene of our prehistory likely played out. It was not a scene of war or of thunderous violence, but perhaps of a quiet, tense recognition. It was the moment when two different kinds of human looked at each other and realized they were not alone. We must visualize the players in this silent drama. On one side, we have the ancestors of modern humans, archaic Homo sapiens, or perhaps a late population of Homo heidelbergensis. Let us call them the tall ones. They stand nearly 6 feet tall, dark-skinned, broad-shouldered, and terrifyingly robust. They carry long, heavy thrusting spears tipped with stone points, weapons designed to puncture the thick hides of buffalo and hippos. They move in large, noisy groups, their voices carrying complex, distinct syllables across the wind. They are the masters of the open day, the apex predators who have begun to bend the world to their will. On the other side, watching from the edge of the tree line or the rocky outcrop of a kopje, is Homo naledi. They are the shadow people. Standing barely 5 feet tall, they look like children next to the giants. Their frames are wiry, their shoulders hunched slightly forward as if ready to pull themselves up a trunk at a moment's notice. They carry no heavy spears, perhaps they hold simple digging sticks or rough stones. They are quiet, moving with the fluid, silent grace of creatures who know they are not the kings of the savannah, but its clever survivors. The scientific term for this overlap is sympatry, two related species existing in the same geographic region at the same time. It happens in nature constantly. Lions and leopards share the Serengeti. Chimpanzees and gorillas share the forests of the Congo. But they do not live together. They partition the world to avoid conflict. The lion takes the open plains and the big prey. The leopard takes the thicket and the smaller game. The gorilla eats the stems on the ground. The chimp eats the fruit in the canopy. It is a diplomatic truce enforced by biology. We can imagine a similar treaty of the grass between the tall ones and the shadow people. The archaeological record suggests that archaic humans preferred the river valleys and the open flat plains where their long legs and projectile weapons gave them the advantage. They were the hunters of the big herds. Homo naledi, with their climbing adaptations and gritty diet, likely clung to the rough country, the Dolomite ridges, the gallery forests, and the difficult terrain where a heavy spear is a nuisance and agility is the prize. Imagine a hot afternoon near the Blaubanksbrut River. A hunting party of the tall ones comes down to drink, their laughter and loud voices scattering the birds. They kneel by the water, splashing, confident in their numbers. High above them, on a limestone ridge, a clan of Homo naledi watches. They are frozen, blending into the brown and gray of the rock. They do not attack. That would be suicide. They do not flee. That would trigger the chase instinct. They simply witness. They see these giants who look so much like them, yet feel so alien. They see the fire-hardened spears and perhaps understand the threat. Did they interact? It is hard to believe they didn't. In a world of scarce resources, paths inevitably cross. Perhaps there were tense standoffs over a scavenged carcass, the tall ones shouting and throwing rocks to drive the smaller scavengers away, the Naledi retreating to the trees, chattering their defiance from the safety of the branches. Perhaps there were moments of curiosity. A Naledi child, wandering too far from the safety of the cliff, stumbling upon a sapiens camp. The mutual confusion would have been profound. To the tall ones, was this creature a person? It walked like them, it had a face like them, but it could not speak their language, and it scuttled up trees like a monkey. Did they see a wild man, a spirit, or a strange animal? Historians and anthropologists often wonder if these encounters planted the seeds of our oldest myths. Almost every culture on Earth has stories of little people, gnomes, sprites, elves, the Ebu Gogo of Indonesia, the Abatwa of Zulu legend. These are often described as small, elusive, trickster spirits who live in caves or deep forests. Is it possible that these stories are not inventions but deep ancestral memories? Is the ogre in the cave actually a memory of us, the terrifying giants? And is the sprite a memory of them, the elusive neighbors? It is a romantic thought, scientifically unprovable, but emotionally resonant. It suggests that our folklore is a fossil record of the mind, preserving the truth of a time when we were not the only humans on the map. The lack of evidence for direct violence is another fascinating silence. We have not found Naledi bones with spear wounds, nor sapiens bones with Naledi bite marks. This might be due to the scarcity of fossils, or it might suggest that their relationship was one of avoidance rather than war. War is expensive. It risks injury and death. If you can simply move to the next valley or retreat to the caves where the giants cannot fit, you do so. Homo Naledi had the ultimate fortress, the rising star system. The tall ones, with their broad chests and claustrophobia-inducing size, could never follow them down the chute. The underworld belonged to Naledi. It was their sanctuary, their cathedral, and their safe house. But coexistence is a fragile thing. The clock of the Pleistocene was ticking. The climate was changing. Africa was becoming drier, the forests shrinking, the grasslands expanding. This shift favored the walkers, the runners, the hunters of the open plains. It favored us. As the mosaic environment disappeared, so too did the unique niche of Homo Naledi. They were specialists in a world that was demanding generalists. We can speculate that their populations, never very large to begin with, began to fragment. The patches of forest became islands, separated by oceans of grass filled with hostile giants and hungry lions. Genetic diversity would have plummeted. The underground astronauts found evidence of this in the teeth, minor anomalies that suggest inbreeding, the signature of a shrinking population. The end of Homo Naledi was likely not a bang, but a slow, quiet fade. There's a terrible poignancy in imagining the last of them, a final clan, dwindling in numbers, holding on to the rocky cliffs of the cradle. The elders tell the stories of the ancestors, pointing to the mouth of the cave where the dead must go. But there are fewer young ones to listen. The firelight in the cave grows dimmer. The processions down the chute become less frequent, and then, one day, the last torch is extinguished. The last Homo Naledi lays down their burden, perhaps curling up in the dust themselves, and the darkness of the Dinaledi chamber becomes absolute. They did not fail. We must be careful not to judge them by the fact that they are gone. By that metric, every dinosaur, every trilobite, every ancient king is a failure. Homo Naledi survived for hundreds of thousands of years. They outlasted empires. They navigated a hostile world with a small brain and a big heart. They solved the problem of being human in a way that was entirely their own. And in their passing, they left us the most precious gift of all, a mystery that forces us to look in the mirror and ask, What are we? For a long time, we defined ourselves by our solitude. We were the chosen ones, the pinnacle of evolution. But the Starman tells us a different story. We are not the inevitable rulers of the earth. We are simply the last ones standing. We are the survivors of a family reunion that was once loud, chaotic, and diverse. We are the lonely siblings wandering a house that used to be full of cousins. As the sun sets on the Pleistocene, the shadows of Homo naledi lengthen and finally vanish into the rock. The tall ones, our ancestors, continue their march across the continent, eventually leaving Africa to populate the globe, carrying with them the tools, the language, and the fire that they might have once seen flickering in the hands of their smaller neighbors. The stage is cleared. The history of Homo sapiens is about to begin in earnest. But deep in the earth, sealed behind the dragon's back, the star people wait. They wait in the silence, their bones resting in the dust, holding their secrets for 300,000 years, until a pair of skinny cavers squeeze through a crack and bring them back into the light. We stand now at the end of the journey, not just at the exit of a cave, but at the edge of a new understanding. Homo naledi has led us through the dark, tight passages of the rising star system and out into a blindingly bright new reality. They have done something that no fossil discovery has done before. They have forced us to ask with genuine humility, what does it mean to be human? For centuries, we built our identity on a foundation of exclusivity. We told ourselves that we were special because we were the only ones who made art, the only ones who mourned the dead, the only ones who mastered fire, and the only ones with the cognitive hardware to understand the cosmos. We measured our worth in cubic centimeters of brain tissue. We looked at the animal kingdom and saw a vast gap between them and us, a gap we filled with our own ego. But Homo naledi has quietly filled that gap with their own small, sturdy bodies. They have shown us that the human spark, that elusive quality of consciousness and culture, is not a luxury reserved for the giants with the big heads. It is a fundamental potential of our lineage, a fire that can burn in a hearth the size of an orange. The story of the Starman dismantles the ladder of progress. We love to think of evolution as a constant upgrade, like swapping an old phone for a new one. We assume that Homo habilis was better than Australopithecus, and Homo erectus was better than habilis, and we are the best of all. But Homo naledi proves that evolution is not a ladder. It is a braided stream. It splits and rejoins. It flows fast in some places and pools in others. Naledi was not a step on the way to us. They were a destination in themselves. They found a way to be human that worked for them. They combined the climbing skills of an ape with the dexterity of a craftsman and the social bonds of a family. They didn't need to change to become us. They were perfect as they were. This realization brings a profound sense of vertigo. It means that during the Middle Pleistocene, the definition of personhood was broader than we ever imagined. If you could travel back to that time, you would not just meet your direct ancestors. You would meet these other people, beings who looked different, moved different, and thought different, yet who shared the fundamental behaviors that we cherish. They were not almost human. They were fully, uniquely Naledi. And the fact that they are gone does not diminish them. They are not failures of history. They are the silent partners in our story, the siblings who stayed in the old house while we moved away. There's a deep emotional resonance in the way they treated their dead. The image of those small, fire-lit processions moving into the dark is one that stays with us long after the scientific papers are read. It suggests that the burden of grief is an ancient one. We are not the first to feel the crushing weight of loss. We are not the first to feel that a body is more than just meat, that it requires a safe place to rest. To know that Homo naledi felt this, that they cared enough to risk their lives for the dignity of their kin, creates a bond of empathy that spans the millennia. It makes the cold stones of the Naledi chamber feel warm. Historians and philosophers will continue to debate the specifics. They will argue over the hashtags on the walls and the arrangement of the bones. They will demand more proof, as they should. But the door that Homo naledi opened cannot be closed. We can no longer look at a small skull and assume a small mind. We can no longer assume that technology and culture are the exclusive property of Homo sapiens. The cerebral Rubicon has been crossed not by growing a bigger brain, but by using a smaller one with more heart. As the sun sets over the cradle of humankind today, the landscape looks much as it did then. The wild olives still twist their roots into the dolomite. The dust still hangs red in the evening light. The rising star cave is silent now. The entrance is gated, protected, a monument to the secrets it held for so long. The underground astronauts have gone home, their work shifting from the physical strain of the climb to the intellectual rigor of the analysis. But the cave remembers. It holds the echo of the dragging footsteps, the scratch of the charcoal torches, and the soft, unintelligible whispers of the star people. We are left with a feeling of deep connection. We are part of a grand, messy, beautiful experiment called the genus Homo. We are the storytellers who survived to tell the tale, but we were not the only characters in the book. Homo Naledi reminds us that we are part of nature, not separate from it. They remind us that intelligence is a spectrum, not a binary switch. And they remind us that even in the deepest dark, life finds a way to create meaning, to create art, and to create love. The Starman has faded back into the shadows of the Highveld, but they have left a light burning in our minds. They have expanded the horizon of our history. We look back now, not at a lonely line of ancestors marching toward us, but at a crowded landscape filled with diverse, complex, and fascinating relatives. We are not the only ones who walked this earth. We are not the only ones who looked at the stars. And in that shared heritage, in that realization of our shared struggle and our shared dignity, we find a strange kind of comfort. We are not alone in the dark. We never were. The fire has burned down to embers now, casting a soft, pulsing glow against the walls of our imagination. The story of Homo Naledi is no longer a sharp list of facts and dates. It has softened into a memory, a feeling of ancient dust and quiet courage. Let the image of the rising star cave fade gently from your mind. The narrow chutes, the jagged ridges, the dark chambers, let them all dissolve into the comfortable darkness behind your closed eyes. You are safe here, in your own time, in your own space. The heavy breathing of the climb is gone, replaced by the slow, steady rhythm of your own breath. In and out, in and out. The mysteries of the past are not there to trouble you, but to cradle you. They are the deep roots that anchor us to the earth, the silent lullaby of a history that stretches back longer than we can comprehend. Feel the weight of your body sinking into the bed, just as the fossils rested in the soft sediment of the chamber. There is no more exploring to be done tonight, no more questions to answer. The scientists have put away their tools, the underground astronauts are resting, the Starman is sleeping in the stone, and now it is your turn. Let the silence of the cave become the silence of your room, protective, quiet, and deep. You are part of a long, unbroken chain of life, a story that has been told for millions of years. And tonight, that story pauses here, with you, in peace. Sweet dreams.